Tales of the Sacred Sword. In this week's tale, a boy finds out that if you're unpleasant, no one will want to be around you. Episode 40. The Boy Who Lost His Shadow. Umbra was in a rotten mood. He stormed out of his house, ignoring his mother's orders to do his chores. The cow could be milked later. They were looking skinny anyway. The chickens could be wait to be fed. They were looking fat anyway. His mother had told him that good boys do their chores. Umbra didn't want to do his chores. Umbra wanted to play. If that meant he wasn't a good boy, so be it. Umbra would be a bad boy. Fists clenched and boots stomping, Umbra marched along the road. On his way, he came across an old lady at a farm. The old lady was walking from the hen house to her front door. In her one hand, she had filled a basket with 12 eggs. In her other hand, her walking stick aided her journey home. As Umbra was running by, a thought took hold of him. An evil thought. If his mother claimed he wasn't a good boy, so be it. Umbra would be a bad boy. Umbra ran up to the old lady. With glee, he kicked her walking stick from under her. The stick flew several feet, bounced once, then rolled away. The old lady lost her balance. As her body fell backward and down, the eggs of her basket soared forward and up into the air. The old lady crashed to the ground, and the eggs followed soon after. Chased by his shadow, Umbra laughed as he raced toward the rising sun. With fists clenched and boots stomping, Umbra skipped along the road. On his way, he came across a dog sleeping in its little house. The dog was sleeping with its head on its front paws. In front of its lips was a well-chewed bone. Around his neck was a collar with a solid iron chain, which kept the dog from straying too far. As Umbra was skipping by, a thought took hold of him. An evil thought. If his mother claimed he wasn't a good boy, so be it. Umbra would be a bad boy. Umbra ran up to the dog. With glee, he snatched its bone and threw it as far as he could. The bone flew 24 paces, bounced once, then rolled away. The dog snapped from his slumber and then ran toward the bone. As he neared it, his chain ran out of length, jerking him backward. He fell and whimpered in pain. The bone mere paces away. Chased by his shadow, Umbra laughed as he raced toward the rising sun. With fists clenched and boots stomping, Umbra ran along the road. On his way, he came across a younger boy standing with his hand on his heart and his other hand raised towards the sky. The boy was whispering words of prayer to the sun. The sun beat down on him. As Umbra raced by, a thought took a hold of him. An evil thought. If his mother claimed he wasn't a good boy, so be it. Umbra would be a bad boy. Umbra approached the praying boy and spoke. "Are you praying?" he asked. The boy nodded. "Well, it won't work that way. You've got to look right at the sun if you're going to pray to it," said Umbra. The boy put his hand back on his heart, then his other toward the sky. He lifted his gaze high to stare at the sun, then began whispering his prayer once again. His eyes squinted from the brightness, and he began to blink. "You have to keep your eyes open or your prayer won't be heard," Umbra cheered. The smaller boy reset himself and tried again. He squinted and strained, and a tear ran down each side of his face. But eventually, he couldn't keep his eyes open or his prayer going. The boy sunk to his bottom, placed his head on his knees, wrapped his arms around them, and began crying. "If you act like that, no one's going to want to be around you. No one! You should apologize," said the boy. Umbra ignored him. He was getting hungry now. Perhaps he would go home. He laughed as he sauntered away from the rising sun. He was nearly home by the time he noticed. His shadow was no longer following him. Umbra spun around. Nothing. The sun beat on him, but his shadow was nowhere to be found. He spun around again. The same result. His shadow was gone. In its place, a terrible loneliness accompanied him. Perhaps this was punishment for not doing his chores. Umbra rushed home and fed the chickens and milked the cow. He worked harder, faster, and more diligently than he ever had in his life. Umbra ran outside beneath the beating sun and checked. Still no shadow. Then Umbra collected some eggs and an old bone. He ran along the road until he reached the old lady's house. He gave her some eggs to replace the ones that were dropped and apologized for kicking her walking stick. She forgave him and even rewarded his change in attitude with a piece of candy. Umbra ran outside underneath the beating sun and checked. Still no shadow. He ran along the road until he reached the dog and its house. The dog growled at him, but Umbra was brave and approached anyway. With an old bone in front of him, he approached the dog. Once the bone was within a few inches of the dog's face, it stopped growling. The dog sniffed the bone and took it. Umbra pet the dog, then ran back into the sunlight. He ran outside underneath the beating sun and checked. Still no shadow. He ran along the road until he found the smaller boy, still crying. Umbra placed the old lady's candy in the boy's hand. "I'm sorry," he said. Umbra stood underneath the beating sun and checked. Still no shadow. With a hand on heart and another toward the sky, he stared at the sun and prayed. "I've apologized to everyone. Please give me back my shadow." "It's not us you have to apologize to," said the smaller boy. He popped the candy in his mouth and continued. "You have to apologize to the sun. That's why I was praying when you came the first time. I was bad, and the sun took my shadow away." Umbra closed his eyes. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." Underneath the beating sun, Umbra opened his eyes. His shadow waited patiently behind him. Thank you for listening to this week's episode. I write and record these tales weekly. If you enjoy them, please click the like and subscribe buttons, along with the bell notification, and leave a comment. Thank you.